Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power will continue to try to write the book that Tolkien never wrote, and they will continue to try to radically change these characters to warp how J.R.R. Tolkien originally wrote them so that they can reimagine them in their own image. It is absolutely sick. It's repulsive and disgusting. And people are rejecting this stuff. We know from a report from the Hollywood Reporter that 63% of people in the United States of America, in North America, chose not to complete the first season of the show. They tuned out. And I think because the fact that they are continuing to embrace this fan fiction, people will continue to tune out. But we have to let people know the truth about what they are doing, and that is destroying or attempting to destroy J.R.R. Tolkien's legacy by, again, rewriting what he wrote and warping it to fit their own image. Before we get to this, I'd like to ask you, please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos here at the Trent Report. I wrote this up over at thatparkplace.com. What that is. And this comes from an interview with Entertainment Weekly. First, we're going to talk about what actress Cynthia Adai Robinson says. She plays Queen Regent Muriel, and she confirmed that this season is about the villains. She told EW, if season 1 was like the hero's journey, season 2 is the villain's journey. I don't think there was any hero's journey in season 1. None of the characters were actually heroic whatsoever. In fact, you saw the hobbits were literally like leaving their own people to die on the street because they broke an ankle or something. It's utterly ridiculous, truly villainous type behavior. Saw no heroes in season 1 whatsoever. Nevertheless, she claims season 2 is the villain's journey. Charlie Vickers, who plays Sauron, shared how this will play out. He said, from a storytelling perspective, instead of trying to guess who Sauron is, we're now inside his mind. I don't think anyone was really guessing who Sauron was. Most people had figured out that it was indeed Halbrand. In the past, the camera would cut away from him when he had his private thoughts. Now the camera follows him through those thoughts. The audience is in on it, which I think is quite fun. So that is interesting because the audience is going to be knowing what Sauron is thinking, because this is what JD Payne, the showrunner, had to say. He says that in Sauron's mind, he's the hero of his own story. So the show will be trying to convince you that this guy is good. Because remember, we just had Charlie Vickers say that the audience is in on it. The camera follows him through those thoughts. And now we have JD Payne saying in Sauron's mind, he's the hero of his own story. So it's literally going to be trying to depict Sauron as a good person, as a hero. I'm so sick and tired of this from Hollywood. They're always trying to make the evil people good and the good people evil. And that's exactly what this show has done. This is why this show is so despicable, in my opinion, because it tries to corrupt the themes, specifically the inherent morality that Tolkien infused his stories with, and is trying to undo them. It's evil. It's truly evil what these people are trying to do. Nevertheless, Payne goes on and says this. His idea of himself is that he wants to heal and rehabilitate Middle-earth. That is true at the very beginning. At the very beginning. That changes very, very quickly, as we'll get to, because we're going to go through what Tolkien actually wrote. He's got a very clear vision for how it should be done, and the only problem is other people keep on getting in the way. That's absolutely not true. He completely eschews any kind of wanting to heal and rehabilitate Middle-earth. As I said, we'll get to this in a little bit. So they're completely changing Sauron's motivations, his characters, and they are changing his relationships too. We'll get to that a little bit too, is how they explain how he interacts with Celebrimbor. So first, before we get to what Tolkien wrote in the Silmarillion and in Unfinished Tales, let's go to a letter that he wrote to Milton Waldman, which is indeed published within the Silmarillion. And he explained just who Sauron is and what his motivations are and how he becomes so evil. And he wrote this. In the Silmarillion and Tales of the First Age, Sauron was a being of Valinor perverted to the service of the enemy and becoming his chief captain and servant. He repents in fear when the first enemy is utterly defeated, but in the end does not do as was commanded, return to the judgment of the gods. He lingers in Middle-earth, very slowly, beginning with fair motives, the reorganizing and rehabilitation of the ruin of Middle-earth. Neglected by the gods, he becomes a reincarnation of evil, and thing lusting for complete power, and so consumed ever more fiercely with hate, especially of gods and elves. So, very clearly, that he gets rid of this whole idea of reorganizing and rehabilitating the ruin of Middle Earth. And instead, he becomes this reincarnation of evil, and he begins lusting for complete power and control and his hatred of the gods and elves. It's not about actually what JD Payne is saying here about him wanting to heal and rehabilitate Middle Earth. Again, that's at the very beginning where he has these fair motives, but obviously it turns into lust for power. So if we want to go to the Silmarillion proper, this is what Tolkien wrote. When Thangor, I'm going to butcher this. When Thangorodrim was broken and Morgoth overthrown, Sauron put on his fair hue again and did obeisance to Yanwe, the herald of Manwe, and abjured all his evil deeds. And some hold that this was not at first falsely done, but that Sauron in truth repented, if only out of fear, being dismayed by the fall of Morgoth and the great wrath of the lords of the West. So he actually did repent, but he refused to obey and submit to the Valar. After he was commanded to return to Aman and receive judgment, he refused because he was ashamed and he was unwilling to return in humiliation and to receive from the Valar a sentence. It might be of long servitude in proof of his good faith, for under Morgoth his power had been great. Therefore, when Eonwy departed, he hid himself in Middle Earth, and he fell back into evil, for the bonds that Morgoth had laid upon him were very strong. So obviously this is very different from the letter. In the letter, he says that he actually has this idea. Here in the Silmarillion, it's very clear that he is disobeying from the get-go because he does not want to serve the penance that they would be doling out to him. And he didn't want to do that because he had all this power and he didn't want to let that go. He wanted to still have that. He didn't want to submit. He wanted to be the one in charge and able to do whatever he wanted. He wanted his quote unquote freedom to do evil. Very clear there. Tolkien would later detail this. Seeing the desolation of the world, Sauron said in his heart that the Valar, having overthrown Morgoth, had again forgotten Middle Earth, and his pride grew apace. So this is how he is justifying to himself his disobedience. Very different from an actual desire to want to heal the earth. It is a justification for disobeying in his own mind because he already knows what he is doing is wrong. He does not envision himself as a hero. He knows deep down what he is doing is wrong, and he is creating a justification for it. Very different things here. And this is what is so disgusting by JD Payne, by his Patrick McKay, his fellow co-showrunner, and the people at Amazon MGM Studios. They are deliberately trying to twist these themes and pervert them because there are very clear themes here that Tolkien has written out for these characters, and they are literally trying to destroy them. He looked with hatred on the Eldar, and he feared the men of Numenor who came back at whiles in their ships to the shores of Middle-earth. But for long, he dissembled his mind and concealed the dark designs that he shaped in his heart. He had these dark designs. They were being shaped in his heart, but he did not let anyone know of them. He dissembled them. He concealed them, but he had them. He does not see himself as a hero at all. He does not see himself as a hero. This is utterly ridiculous. He knows what he's doing is wrong. He knows what he's doing is evil, and he's going to act upon that anyways. And he knows the punishment when you do that because he saw what happened to Morgoth. So he knows what he's doing. This idea that he sees himself as a hero is utter bunk, utter garbage, and it's literally just trying to say that, oh, if you're doing bad things, you can still see yourself as a good person. No, you can do bad things and recognize that you're doing bad things and realize that you're doing bad things and continue to do them. So Tolkien goes on and writes this. Men he found the easiest to sway of all the people of the earth. But long he sought to persuade the elves to his service, for he knew that the firstborn had the greater power, and he went far and wide among them, and his hue was still of one both fair and wise. Sauron took to himself the name of Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and they had at first much profit from his friendship. Tolkien went on to explain that Sauron convinced the elves of Eregion to join his cause by sharing a desire to care for and enrich Middle-earth, but it was a lie to bring them under sway. He said this, Sauron guided their labors, and he was aware of all that they did, for his desire was to set a bond upon the elves and to bring them under his vigilance. Again, he is using this justification to himself that he originally justified to himself to heal Middle-earth, rehabilitate it, etc. He's now using that as a lie to bring the elves under his control. That's not actually something he wants to do. He's just lying to the elves to bring them under his control, to convince them to basically so he can have ownership of them. So they enslave themselves to him. Very different from how JD Payne is describing Sauron. Very different. These are not the same characters at all anymore. So on top of how the show will change Sauron, Entertainment Weekly's Christian Holub detailed that Sauron's entire purpose of working with the elves has been changed from Tolkien's original writing. Remember, he hates the elves. He wants to bring them under his control. He wants them to be enslaved to him. So no longer will he hold hatred in his heart for the elves, and he convinces them to accept him by wanting to rehabilitate Middle-earth. Instead, Sauron seeks the elves' aid so he can depose Adar, who, quote, kicked out his old boss, leaving Sauron temporarily homeless, as Rings of Power depicts in Season 1. That does not happen at all in Tolkien's Legendarium. Holub adds this: Sauron has tried to compensate for that loss by making new friends among the elves. He may have failed in his attempt to sway Galadriel, but he still needs help to enact his master plan, and one elf in particular is uniquely equipped to provide it. Obviously, that elf is Celebrimbor. So he has completely different motivations for why he is doing anything now as well. I mean, this is a completely different character. It's no longer Sauron. You can't even call this Lord of the Rings anymore. They really should have just called it some other thing, because they are literally doing something other than Lord of the Rings. I mean, it's just utterly ridiculous. They paid the amount of money that they paid to get the name of Lord of the Rings and stick it on here, because this is just detrimental to the Lord of the Rings and what J.R. Tolkien wrote. It's disgraceful. It truly is disgraceful what they're doing, what they're trying to do. The entire relationship between Celebrimbor and Sauron will also be altered. Actor Charles Edwards explains, he plays Celebrimbor, explains how the two will be portrayed in the second season. He says this: Celebrimbor has the ability and Sauron has the vision. It's an interesting give and take, which often happens in these kinds of relationships where they both need each other badly. As you'll see, it plays out in a very interesting way. It's something so personal and psychological that is playing out against the backdrop of Middle-earth and the epic scale that you would expect from The Lord of the Rings. So he's basically trying to describe that there is a symbiotic relationship between the elves and Sauron. That is not the case. We just read what Tolkien wrote in the Silmarillion. Sauron clearly is trying to bribe the elves to bring them under his control, his sway. It's all about him duping the elves in order for them to be controlled by him. It's not symbiotic. He's literally just lying to them to convince them to be beholden to him, because he hates them. So we also have this from Unfinished Tales, The Lost Lore of Middle-earth. Tolkien described that Sauron is clearly manipulating Celebrimbor, and it's not the symbiotic relationship that Edwards describes. He wrote this: Sauron had better fortune with the Noldor of Eregion, and especially with Celebrimbor, who desired in his heart to rival the skill and fame of Feanor. Sauron used all his arts upon Celebrimbor and his fellow smiths. So again, I don't think there's anything wrong with Celebrimbor wanting to rival the skill and fame of Feanor. Obviously, you can say that there is probably a little envy, a little jealousy happening there, but there's also probably some magnanimity mixed in there. And obviously, Sauron probably manipulates a little bit of that jealousy and envy and is able to dupe Celebrimbor into what he wants him to accomplish, which is the construction of these rings, etc. Anyways, Tolkien goes on and says this: Sauron used all his arts upon Celebrimbor and his fellow smiths, who had formed a society or brotherhood very powerful in Eregion, the Gwaith y Myrdain. But he worked in secret, unknown to Galadriel and Celeborn. Before long, Sauron had the Gwaith y Myrdain under his influence, for at first they had great profit from his instruction in secret matters of their craft. So great became his hold on the Myrdain that at length he persuaded them to revolt against Galadriel and Celeborn and to seize power in Eregion. And that was sometime between 1350 and 1400 of the Second Age. So again, it's not a symbiotic relationship. It might look that way, but it clearly is not. It's not how Edwards is explaining it. Edwards is explaining that it is a very symbiotic relationship right here. It's an interesting give and take is what he is describing it as. It's not. There is no give and take. It's basically Sauron bribing them to basically lick his boots, be his slaves. fall under his control. And the elves aren't really getting anything in return except they're selling their souls to Sauron by taking his bribe. But Tolkien says this, though. Now, Celebrimbor was not corrupted in heart or faith, but had accepted Sauron as what he posed to be, which is obviously Anatar, the giver of gifts, in this fair form. And when at length he discovered the existence of the One Ring, he revolted against Sauron and went to Lornad to take counsel once more with Galadriel. So this idea about the give and take is utterly ridiculous. Obviously, Celebrimbor does indeed have, there's much more give and take with the dwarves. That's what really you have the give and take in Tolkien's Legendarium. I didn't include it in this article, but if you read the Unfinished Tales, you see how Celebrimbor works with, I think his name's Narvi, and who's like the master dwarfsmith there, and they beatify the Khazad-dûm, that kingdom there, because of Celebrimbor's relationship with Narvi, and really kind of brings that elven craftsmith to there. And then obviously you have the dwarves working with the elves as well, with the mithril and all that stuff to create the rings of power. But they're clearly changing Sauron, changing his character, very abundantly clear. It's not even the same character anymore. And they're going to be changing his relationship with Celebrimbor. And to me, it looks like Celebrimbor's character is getting changed as well. Well, it just looks like this is just going to be another disaster. It's going to be even worse than the first season to me. So we'll see what their viewership numbers are going to be. I have a feeling it's going to be a lot less than the first season because so many people, like we said, 63% of people did not complete this show in the United States of America. That is absolutely abysmal. It is terrible. Only 37% of people started the show and completed it. And you have to assume that a lot of them were people watching the show to absolutely roast and torch it for being the abomination that it was. And so the second season looks like it's just going to be a lot worse as they are completely changing the character of Sauron and trying to sickeningly warp the themes and morality that Tolkien has in his works. But let me know what you guys make of this. Let me know in the comments below. Remember to always be charitable, especially to each other, but to always speak the truth.